Okay, I believe I am live. Please let me know in the chat if I am not live or if you can't hear me. But hello. So today I want to talk about the cost of living crisis. So hopefully a couple of people will join me live. But I want to talk about the cost of living crisis because honestly, I feel like it's just like sometimes when you're just almost tired of it because everyone's talking about it or like the news just keeps harping on about it. And I think I just wanted to again ground us and just talk about some of the things that we're going to be doing with our money this year because it does feel like we will still be in a period of high inflation. And yeah, I feel like it may I don't know what it's going to be like this year. I think I did a video just talking about 2023 and money goals. So make sure you do check it out. But I think it's going to be an interesting year. So I just want to talk through some of the opportunities that may come about if you decide to take them. And I think I'm the type of person that really wants to be quite like an optimistic person and really feel and really kind of talk through how we can actually be really resourceful with our personal finances. So that's what I want to talk about today. If you do have any questions in the chat, because I see a few people joining me now. If you do have any questions in the chat, please do let me know. If you cannot hear me, please do let me know. But essentially, let's talk about cost of living prices, what we're doing with our money, and if you are ever in the place where you actually want to get better with your finances, if you want to be able to save more, start investing for your future, that is also something that I can help with. So make sure you do check out my one-on-one coaching. I will link it in the description below for you, bossfinanceacademy.com, if you want to book a call and chat more about that. So let's talk about what we're doing with our money and what I think you should be doing as well. So even though this year it's still predicted to be quite high inflation, I think one of the biggest things that we're still going to be doing is really adapting our budget and being more realistic. So the reason why I say that is because prices, especially, I feel like prices last year really changed when it came to just general things like if you were just going to the restaurant or just groceries was groceries was going up. Groceries was an interesting one. Like even though we shop at Aldi, which is probably considered one of the like most cost effective supermarkets, like I was seeing like some of our weekly shopping. It was just I don't know. It was interesting because we went from like spending £34 a week on average to then spending 44, and then some weeks it was like 49, and it wasn't like we drastically changed what we were eating. Like it was just that's how I knew that food prices had definitely gone up because we hadn't changed anything. So one of the biggest things we're going to be doing is really adapting our budget and being more realistic. And I say this because if prices continue to change, that is going to have an impact on your budget, specifically if your income maybe isn't changing that much. So let's say that you have like a 9 to 5 job and you know that your monthly bills, no, your monthly income is like, I don't know, £2,000 or dollars a month. Well, even though you have that income, some of the items in your budget may change. So for instance, I think one of the two biggest things in our budget that changed last year was groceries and petrol. Those were the two biggest things because I remember there was times where we would be spending like £80 on petrol, then it went up to £90, and it went up to 100, and now on average we're spending about 120. And so it's really important to be realistic with your budget. If you are spending 120 pounds or dollars a month on petrol, on transport, but you're still budgeting 90 pounds or dollars, that needs to change. Right, we need to be realistic. We cannot have our, like, what's the saying, like our head in the deer lights. That's probably not the saying, but you need to be very realistic because that is then going to have an impact on your budget overall, and it's also going to have an impact on how much you're able to save, how much you're able to invest. And so we're going to continue doing that. So we are going to be looking at, okay, are food prices continuing to increase? Do we need to adapt our budget? And there's obviously two ways you can go about it. So, for example, with groceries, you could either say that, okay, I'm going to buy less food, or if you don't want to reduce the food that you're buying, or like how much food you're buying, then you need to increase your food budget, right? There's no point in kind of spending the same, but you haven't actually. No, there's no point in food prices increasing, but then you're not changing your budget, especially if you want to buy the same food. So you need to decide: am I going to reduce how much food I'm buying, or am I going to just increase the food budget? And the same with petrol, and the same with any other like categories, whether it's eating out, because restaurants these days, they got to increase their prices too. So really think about, what do I need to adapt in my budget that I haven't already? Are there things that are getting more expensive that I need to change? I know one of the things was like our personal care. That started increasing last year, and so that's why like we would then have to increase our personal care budget last year. And it's so interesting because even looking through our budget in our general spending category, so this is like any discretionary spending, we are probably spending at least £100 more than we were spending in 2021. Like I could see it. I could see it clearly because on average, I think in 2021 we were only spending like £650, like in general, not including like any other essential bills or savings or anything like that. We are spending around 650, but now on average we're spending about 750, and that's mainly because things have increased. Like even my husband's rugby club, he never used to have to pay for matches. Now, because of inflation, he has to pay for matches. So you have to take all of this into consideration. But I think one of the biggest things is having a look at your numbers, and that's why I always say it's really important to know your numbers. And what I mean by this is know your expenses, know how much it is costing. And it does not have to take a long time, by the way. It really doesn't have to take a long time. I literally will do the budget once a month, and then we use Monzo to track our spending, but Monzo will tell us, okay, this is how much you ended up spending overall, and then I'll just update the budget at the end of the month. And that's all I do. It doesn't take very long. So really knowing your numbers, being realistic is going to be important. And again, if you guys have any questions, please do let me know. Let me know your thoughts on like this year, what else you're planning to do with your money. Let us know. That would be great. So that's the first thing. Oh, and also, actually, what I forgot to mention is I would say that another thing that we're doing is when it comes to our budget, we are also planning for upcoming increases. So, what I mean by this is, especially if you're in the UK, in April, if the government doesn't do anything, our energy bills are probably going to rise, like they're probably going to increase. So, because of that, and since we know that it's going to increase in April, we have actually been setting aside some money to prepare for that increase. And we've been doing that because the government has also been giving us money, and like the government should have been giving everyone money to help with the energy costs. So rather than spend that money on something else, what we've been doing is pretty much putting most of that money into a separate pot to get ready for April. So that in April, if our bills like increase, like our utility bills increase, we at least have some money in a pot to at least pay for like either the month, or at least like pay in a lump sum, just so that it's not like a drastic change in terms of how the bills have increased, if that makes sense. So if that's something you could do, definitely look at it. If you're paying like gas and electricity and you know that, okay, come April it's probably going to increase, I don't know how much I'm going to be paying, I would start preparing for that now so that it doesn't become a shock come April. So there are things that you can do in advance. Obviously, if you have the money to do it, there are things you can do in advance to help you going forwards, even if things start to increase. So that's definitely something I would be looking at. The second thing I would be looking at is actually to do with your income. So I always have a caveat when it comes to like increasing income and making more money, because I'm always in the camp of, yes, focus on making more money. Like I want you to make more money. I will always tell my clients, how are you making money? What are you doing? But it's really important that when you're also making that money, you know where that money is going. So you know how to manage that money well. But in terms of income, obviously we're aware that wages have been stagnant for years. Like it's been such a long time since wages have really increased. And so because inflation is so high, so because the cost of goods and services are increasing drastically, it's going to be really important to now start thinking about our income. And so what I'm going to be doing next, like over the next year, and even beyond, to be honest, is really focusing on where my strengths are and where I can give value and solve problems. And I think that's going to be important no matter what you do. So whether you have a business or whether you are in your 9 to 5, I think being giving value and being a really clear problem solver is going to be the difference between maybe how much you make and whether you get promoted, for example, or whether you end up getting another job, or whether you get or maybe if you're at risk of redundancy. And so if you haven't really focused on where your strengths lie and what you want to focus on, it could be that you are trying to get a promotion in your job so that you can keep up with inflation. That is something that you could potentially do. It could be that you decide to actually look for another job, or you can start looking for another job, let your employer know so that they may decide, actually, if you need a pay rise, we need to give you one, otherwise you're going to leave. This is useful if you've been doing your job well and they don't want to lose you. This is very different if they want to lose you in the first place. I'm not going to lie, like, I come from a HR background, so I know. But if you are someone who is a strong performer and you know that your organization probably wouldn't want to take the time to now have to find someone else, you could use it to your advantage to let them know, look, I am being offered another job and they're paying me this much, and see if they can counter offer you. There are some companies that will actually counter offer you and they may pay you more because they've seen how serious you are. So that is something that you definitely want to think about. I would also say that there are even just short-term things that you can be doing. So, there's so much stuff that you can do online, like how to make money. There are things like just simple stuff like selling your stuff. I've sold a couple of items on Vinted, and it's just like really quick money. If you need that quick money, there's stuff that's what you can do. Or even just like getting a second job, because even with like making more money, like if you're trying to start a business, for example, or a side hustle, that can take some time. It may not happen very quickly. So what you then want to think about is, if you are trying to save really quickly, or if you have specific goals that you want to do very quickly this year, it could be that you end up getting a second job instead. Like, for example, maybe you drive for Uber, or maybe there's like online jobs that you can do, or maybe you can become a virtual assistant. There are so many different things that you can do, and I would say, like, a really good resource for this is, I'm part of a membership called Financial Joy Academy, but the people who run that membership is Ken and Mary from the Humble Penny. So they also have a YouTube channel, and they talk about like ways that you can make money. You can make money from home, or just different things that you can think about when it comes to increasing your income. So don't think that you just have to rely on that one job and that's going to pay your bills. It doesn't have to be like that. You can also think about ways of making more money so that you can still be able to afford the other things. Like, you can still be able to also save, you can still also be able to invest your money, for example. So make sure you're kind of taking advantage of that. The other thing I would say is, you may also want to think about getting creative, for example. So even think about, like, okay, what are my biggest expenses? So for example, if housing is one of your biggest expenses, could you potentially move? Could you decide to, I don't know, be a lodger, for example, or move in with your parents? I have done both scenarios. I used to live in a shared accommodation with other professionals, and then I became a lodger. So I literally lived with a family, and then I also moved back home during the pandemic. When I moved back home, it wasn't really from a financial perspective. It was just more so because I didn't want to be, on my own. But that is something that you can do if you feel like, actually, I just need to save up some cash very quickly, or maybe you're just trying to like quickly buy your first home, but house prices are ridiculous right now and you need to increase your deposit. That might be something that you want to do, so that at least you don't have to pay as much rent. So it's starting to think about, how can I be a bit creative, or how can I even use the resources that I currently have? So whether that is with making more money and increasing your income, or it could be looking at some of your biggest expenses and trying to decrease that. Now, I will definitely say that, of course, being a lodger, or, I don't know, like living with other people, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. I didn't find it amazing. But if it's something that you feel like, do you know what, I don't mind sacrificing this for a few months, 100% do it. Like I would definitely recommend it. So really think about how you can be creative, especially because even though like this time is very difficult and it's going to be very difficult for people who are low income earners, this time can also bring really big opportunities if you know where to find them. And so you want to think about, okay, well, what end do I want to be on? Do I want to really set myself up for the next decade and be creative and think about ways that I can make money, use that money to save, use that money to invest, or do I kind of want to stay in the same situation? Like you have to really ask yourself that. And it is tough because of the environment that we're in, and you will continue to see a lot of negativity. I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of negativity probably throughout 2023, to be honest. But you have to think about, okay, well, even though there is all of this negativity surrounding me, how can I make sure that I still turn this into an opportunity? And so I'm hoping that even today's live, you start to think a little bit differently with your money going forwards. So that was the second thing. And again, if you've got any questions, guys, please do let me know in the comments. The third thing that I will say is making sure that we still have our emergency fund intact. And this is going to be so, so important. And I know that I always harp on about emergency funds, but I say it from a place of emergency funds can really help you from a mindset perspective, because at least knowing that you have some savings there in case anything happens, if God forbid something does happen, you at least know you have money to cover yourself. And it's just small things like, for example, my husband, I think it was like last year, he accidentally hit someone's car, and we didn't really want to go through our insurance. So we just paid in cash for the other guy's garage, so that he could fix his car. And we were able to do that because we had an emergency fund, because we didn't plan for that to happen. It was not expected, but we had an emergency fund. And so something that could have become a disaster only became an inconvenience. And when that happened, like the amount of peace I just felt was ridiculous, because I have been in situations, which I think some of you guys will know, where something has happened to my car and I have had no money. My overdraft has been maxed out. I have had nothing. And I'm literally just thinking, how on earth am I going to pay for this? Like, how on earth am I going to pay a £200 bill? Where am I supposed to get the money from? And then I'm having to now go and ask people, like ask my family members and even ask my partner at the time for money, because I didn't have money. And I had a maxed out overdraft. So it's not like I could even use my overdraft, right? And at that time, I didn't have like a credit card or anything. So I couldn't use that. And so having an emergency fund is so important, yes, from a financial perspective, but I would say it's even more important from a mindset perspective, because knowing that you have money in the bank in case anything happens, and especially during this time where so many companies are laying people off, having that emergency fund is going to help you, because then at least, whilst if you, for example, got laid off, rather than worrying about how you're going to pay your bills, you could then be focusing on how you're going to get your next job. Let me say that again. If you were to lose your job today, if you had an emergency fund, you would not have to worry about how you're going to pay your bills. You could then use that energy and that focus to shift that to now thinking about, how am I going to get my next job? What kind of job do I want? Because the problem that we have is that for many of us, if, for example, something happened like we lost our job, we're then frantically thinking about, how am I supposed to pay my bills? And maybe we then end up taking a job that is purely made for the money that we know that we're probably not even going to feel value, that we're not going to value, just purely because we need to pay our bills. Having savings and having an emergency fund would at least be able to alleviate that for a few months at least. So it's really important to start thinking, if you don't have an emergency fund, how you can get one. If you need to save for one, it might be that you have to just like, I don't know, like work for Uber or something, do a couple of Uber trips, get that money ready so that at least you have something just in case anything happens. And by God's grace, nothing will happen. Like I'm like hoping that because of the way the labor market is, there are still a lot of jobs available. So, hopefully if anything happens, you'll be able to find another job. But it's always good to just be prepared, and just having that peace of mind will be really helpful. So hopefully, if you don't know have an emergency fund or you don't know how much you should have on your emergency fund, I do have a video about that. So definitely like check out my channel or just type in Verania Spain emergency fund. I explain all of that in much more detail. So definitely think about having an emergency fund or saving up for one as well. So for us, actually, if I talk about an emergency fund, so we currently have a 3 month emergency fund as an example. I'll just use us as an example. And obviously, experts will say that you want between 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. Some people may even have a year's worth of emergency funds. I will say that a lot of it kind of depends on the nature of your job. So, like, what industry are you in? Are you likely to get a job very quickly? If you are a two or one income household, for example, there are so many different variables. But for us, a 3 month emergency fund actually works whilst we're in this situation at the moment, like whilst we're in this season, mainly because my husband's job, he works in an industry where he will probably almost always have a job. And because our expenses aren't that high, even if I lost my job, for example, we would still be able to pay for our expenses just purely with his income. So that's basically why we have a 3 month emergency fund. But you want to think about like your own situation. How much would you want to have in your emergency fund, or even just having a started emergency fund? Even if you don't have the full fund, like even if you don't have like 3 months worth of expenses, start with 1 month. Start with something. So knowing that you at least have some savings will definitely help you out. So it's definitely something that you want to think about. So that is the third thing. Now, the fourth thing that we're currently doing, which I will say, is we are actually still educating ourselves when it comes to just, I guess, improving ourselves in general. So even though like it is a like things are a lot more expensive, we're still in a position where we still feel like we do want to continue educating ourselves. So whether that may be like still continuing to work on our mindset, still reading books, like I'm part of memberships and coaching and all of that stuff. I think this is going to be really helpful because what it does is it helps me to still be plugged in to what I'm trying to focus on and what I am trying to work on. And it's not causing me to derail and just think about survival mode. So for me personally, I think that especially if you are in a position to, it is worth still being able to educate yourself, whether it's within your job, for example, whether it's increasing your skills, whether it's focusing on your own mindset. So it may be that like your money mindset is something that you want to focus on. So how you view money, it may be that again, you want to focus on how you can actually create another income for yourself. It may be even your health, for example, whatever it is. I still think it's important to work on because during this time, it's probably quite important when things are so negative around you. So the reason why the reason why I still have a mentality where I'm still working towards my financial goals is because I'm plugged into still educating myself. And so even if there are negative stuff around, like I don't watch the news very often because I just think it's just I don't know. I find the news very negative and I don't really want to put that in my mind. But even though that is still happening, I am still in a place where I still feel abundant with whatever I have, even when things are expensive. Like, even if I see our spending has increased, I'm still plugged into being more abundant just purely because I'm educating myself or purely because I'm still plugged into things like prayer. Like, if you have a church, are you making sure that you're plugged into that? All of that is still going on despite what is happening and despite the cost of living going up. I'm still plugging in and still doing the same things that I would have done in 2021 or 2020 or 2019 because it will still continue to help me still push through even though my environment like around me is like going down, but I still want to be able to level up, if that makes sense. So I would definitely recommend like still educate yourself, still watch those videos, still buy those books, still work on your mindset, whatever you have to do to really make sure that you're plugged in and still working towards your financial goals. I think that would be really useful. And then linked to that, I guess the other thing that we're doing is we are still working on our financial goals. So in the long term, we are still working on financial independence. That is something that hasn't changed, even though 2022 was a little bit of a car crash financially, like with a lot of people, and just things like heated up and it was all a bit crazy, it's not stopped us from still thinking about our goals and thinking about what we're working towards. In the short term, we are still saving for like thinking about buying a house. And even though, guys, I know, like I still even get stressed. Like when I go on Rightmove or Zoopla, which are like if you're not from the UK, they're like where you can find houses where people are selling houses. And I see some of these house prices, I'm just like, sorry? And especially when I've been looking at house prices from like 2020 and 2019, and I some of those prices, I'm just like, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous because the house price has dramatically increased, and I'm I'm very what's the word? I'm very cautious because I don't want to buy a house where we end up being house poor. I do not want that to happen. And so, especially with interest rates rising, it is something that we are continuously looking at because I'm not about to buy a house where I then have to pay 60% of my take home pay to a mortgage. I refuse. Like, it's not happening because I'm not here to be house poor. Because if anything was to happen and we buy a house that we cannot afford, I don't know. It's just not something that I envision us doing. And so we need to be like we're being really thoughtful in terms of yes, we're still going to be like saving, but it might be that we decide, you know what, actually we would rather save for a bigger deposit and buy much more equity in the house so that we don't have like a high mortgage payment, for example. So that might be something that you want to think about as well. It's not to say that um it's like virtually impossible and you can't do it. It's just to say that your timeline may change, like, and that's fine. Like, if you can be adaptable with your timeline, I would do it. So it's really important to, okay, yes, think about your financial goals, but think about what's going to be happening in the short term and in the long term. The reason why I say like we're being very cautious with house buying is because in the long term our goal is financial independence. And that's going to be very difficult if most of our take home pay is to pay a mortgage. Like, it's going to be very difficult to work towards like financial independence. And so we need to be really careful and think about, okay, well, how much do we want a house? But how much do we want a house that we can really afford so that we also have extra cash to then work towards financial independence? And financial independence is basically having investments that pretty much pays for your expenses so that you don't have to physically work to pay for those expenses. So that is something that you might want to look at. And it's kind of difficult because looking at the past couple of years, obviously people that may have bought a house where there were really cheap interest rates, but those same people, if they had like 2-year mortgages or 2-year term mortgages or 3-year term mortgages, they may struggle when the interest rates increase because they may already have like, I don't know, like the mortgage payment may already be like 50% of their take home pay. And so I don't want to be in that position where if like we bought a house and then interest rates went up in the future, I don't want to be in a position where we then can't afford it, or we can't afford to save, or we can't afford to invest. And so that's going to be something that we really look at this year and focus on. It's not to say that we've like scrapped our plans and like we're like, nope, forget it, don't worry. It's not that. It's just that we're thinking, okay, we may need to adapt our plans. And if we do need to adapt our plans, this is what we're going to do about it, or this is how much we're going to save, or this is what we're going to focus on. So that's something that you may want to also think about as well. And then the sixth thing, in terms of like still in terms of the cost of living, the sixth thing that we're actually still going to be doing with our money is still investing. And the reason why, and I feel like this probably sounds a bit counterintuitive because especially if you maybe started investing during the pandemic, you may have seen that if you, especially if you were investing in the stock market, you may have seen that your stocks have gone down, and you may be thinking, why on earth would like I be investing my money during this time? But the reason being is because this is probably the best time for us to invest because we then get to take advantage of the low prices. And I always say, like, when it comes to investing, especially if you know what you're doing and if you understand it, when investments go down, that like when the stock price goes down, that is like that is basically as if it's going on sale. It's literally like me going to the store and then my favorite jacket, which was maybe £100 or $100, is now 20% off. Like if I saw that, I would literally just want to quickly run to the shops and buy that jacket. And that is simply how I view investing as well. Because investments are a lot cheaper now, I like we're taking advantage of that. So even though it hasn't been a great year for stocks over the past year, it hasn't really phased us because for us, we invest for the long term. And specifically for me, I don't plan on using those investments for a long time, like for a good few years. And so because we are still like in our late 20s, we have time for those investments to recover and literally just use it to our advantage. So that is definitely something that we are doing. It's something that you may want to think about. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't tell you what to invest in. Make sure you do your own research, but that is something that we are currently doing as well. So I think just what it seems like when it comes to the cost of living, like yes, things are much more expensive, but I think you just need to think about where you're currently at. So if, for example, you're still able to spend money, but you're still able to save, you're even maybe still able to invest, well, what you might want to be doing is thinking about how you can actually gain more opportunities so that you can continue to do it. Whereas if you're on the other camp where actually you maybe feeling like I don't know if I'm like handling my I don't know if I have like enough money to pay my bills, for example, that's when you then want to start thinking, actually, income is probably what I need to focus on because there's only so much you can cut out of your budget, especially if, for example, like you are already living with a bare bones budget. Like let's say you don't have any subscriptions, you don't eat out, you don't do any of that. Well, then of course your focus needs to be on income because there's only so much you can decrease your expenses by. Whereas for many of us, because we've kind of already had like more of a spending problem. So it's more like the way we spent money is maybe why we weren't able to like save money before. That's where you then want to shift your focus and think about actually, do I need to start really thinking about how I can manage my money so that I can save more, so that I can invest more, and so that I can like work towards my other financial goals. So that's essentially what I wanted to talk about. I mean, if you do have any questions, let me know. There's a few of you on the line. And actually, I think there is one thing I'm gonna try this poll because I'm gonna try an experiment and just ask a question and just see if you can actually see this. So I'm gonna ask, are you worried about the cost of living crisis? And let's see what you answer. So I have just posted a question. I hope I can see this because I can't necessarily see it. But if not, then I know that this doesn't work. I don't know if it's worked actually. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Well, do let me know. I'm going to hang on for a couple of minutes just to see if there are any questions. But um, I don't think the poll. No, I don't think the poll worked very well. But I'm going to hang on to see if there's any questions. But I think like the moral of this live is just to please like continue not to like don't panic this year, even if people are saying like, oh, it's going to be worse than you know 2022 or like it's just going to be really bad. I would say okay, that's their perspective, but really think about what you want to focus on and really think about again, what can you control? I always say that no matter what happens, you have to think about what you can control. Like, what can you do with the money that you have now? And if you need to make any changes or if you need to learn how to manage it better, that is something that you can control and that is something that you can do. Or if you need to like move employers because your employer isn't paying you as much as you need it to, then of course, that is something that you can focus on as well. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Unfortunately, the poll doesn't seem to have worked. I thought it would, but it doesn't. But as I mentioned again, if you ever want one-on-one help when it comes to managing your money better, if you are more focused on like the saving more or starting to invest your money, you're at that point, then you can definitely book a call. and that's by the link in the description. But I'm going to leave it there, guys. If there's no questions, I hope you have an amazing evening and I will see you guys soon. My next live will probably be in February, so I will let you know when I'm doing that. But again, I hope you all have a great week. See you soon. Bye.